Warning: this content may be unsuitable for viewers under 18 years of age and those who are sensitive to fear-inducing material. If you are under 18 or easily disturbed by frightening content, please stop reading now. Viewer discretion is strongly advised. There's something about a storm that strips a person bare, not just physically, though the rain does that, soaking through jackets and shirts until you're shivering against the cold, but psychologically. When the sky turns that bruised, angry shade of green, when the thunder rolls across the plains like something enormous and invisible is dragging its knuckles across the roof of the world, when the lightning comes, not politely from a distance, but right here, right outside your window, illuminating everything in that terrible white flash that lasts half a second but burns into your memory forever. In that half second, you see things you were never supposed to see. The stories you're about to read are real. They were told by real people. People who were sitting exactly where you're sitting right now, who thought they were safe inside their walls, inside their homes, inside the fortress of ordinary life. They had no reason to believe that the storm outside was doing more than just raging. They were wrong. What follows are 3 accounts of nights that began with thunder and ended with terror. Nights when the storm didn't just knock out the power or flood the basement. Nights when the storm covered something. When it provided the perfect soundtrack for something that had nothing to do with weather. Read these alone if you dare. Read them at night if you want the full effect. But whatever you do, don't read them near a window. Because the next flash of lightning might show you something you can't unsee. The Thing in the Pine Barrens. Saturdays in September, I was 13 when it happened, living in a small town in rural New Jersey, not far from the Pine Barrens. If you've never been to the Pine Barrens, you need to understand something about them. They are not a forest. Not exactly. There's something older, something that doesn't welcome people. Miles and miles of scraggly pitch pine trees, cranberry bogs, sand roads that go nowhere, and a silence underneath everything that isn't really silence at all. It's the sound of the barrens watching you. People disappear in the Pine Barrens. They have for centuries. The locals know to stay on the marked roads, to keep your headlights on even in daylight, and to never, under any circumstances, pull over if your car breaks down after dark. You wait for someone to come to you. You do not get out and walk, but this story doesn't start in the Barrens themselves. It starts at home, where I thought I was safe. It was a Saturday in early September. I lived with my parents, my older brother Marcus, and my younger sister Daisy in a 2-story craftsman house on a dead-end road. The Pine Barrens started about half a mile behind our backyard, just a stretch of unmowed field, then a rusted chain-link fence, then the trees. You couldn't see them from the house, but you always knew they were there. That Saturday, a massive storm system had been building all day. By the time evening hit, the sky was doing things that made our weather app completely useless. It kept refreshing and showing different predictions, like even the algorithm couldn't make sense of what was coming. My parents had gone over to the neighbor's place for a dinner party, leaving Marcus, who was 16, in charge of me and Daisy. The 3 of us were in the living room. We dug out an old game console from the hall closet, and we're taking turns with a split-screen racing game when the thunder started getting serious. Not the gentle rumbling from far away, but the percussive, house-shaking kind that makes you think something has physically struck the building. Daisy kept flinching. Marcus kept telling her to relax. I kept watching the windows. The power went out at 8:14. I know the exact time because I checked my phone in the sudden darkness, and the numbers were right there, glowing green, 8:14 p.m. The house went completely silent except for the storm. "Probably a line down," Marcus said, already moving toward the junk drawer in the kitchen where we kept the emergency flashlights. He found 2 of them and handed one to me. "Dad said if the power ever goes out, we need to check the circuit panel. There's one out, back by the meter box, and one in the utility room." "I'll go out back with you," I told him. Daisy announced she was absolutely not going anywhere and planted herself on the couch with her phone as a light source. Marcus pulled on his rain jacket, and I grabbed mine. We went out through the back door onto the covered porch, and immediately the sound of the storm was overwhelming. The rain hammering the porch roof, the wind bending the pine trees at the edge of the property, the distant percussion of thunder. Marcus shone his flashlight at the meter box mounted on the back of the house, and we ran through the rain to reach it. He opened the panel and started working through the breakers, clicking them back and forth in sequence. I held the flashlight steady while he worked, doing my best to keep the rain off the panel with my body. The rain was ice cold and coming down in sheets. "Hold this," Marcus said, handing me his flashlight so he had both hands free. "I'm going to go check the utility room panel. Keep clicking these. Try the big ones first." He went inside. I stood there in the rain, 2 flashlights in my hands, methodically clicking breakers while the storm raged around me. That's when I heard it. The edge of the light. At first, I thought it was a branch cracking somewhere in the field behind the house. Storms do that. They snap dead wood. They tear things loose. They make the landscape rearrange itself. I didn't think anything of it. But then I heard it again, and this time it was different, more deliberate. The sound of something large moving through the tall grass beyond our fence, about 40 feet away. I shone both flashlights toward the field. The beams were powerful, but the rain softened them, cutting their range by half. I could see the fence, the first 30 feet of field, the grass bent sideways by the wind, nothing else. Then the lightning struck. It came from almost directly overhead. That's how close the storm was, and for one full, brilliant second, the entire backyard was lit up like noon. The field, the fence, the tree line beyond. And at the edge of that tree line, half hidden behind one of the larger pines, something was pressed against the bark. It was tall. It was the approximate shape of a person, but the proportions were wrong. Too long in the limbs, too still for something that must have been standing in a 40-mile-an-hour wind. It wasn't moving. It wasn't flinching from the lightning. It was just there, at the edge of the trees, and for that half second of brilliant white light, it was looking directly at me. Then the lightning was gone, and I was standing in darkness with rain running down my neck and my heart hammering so hard I could feel it in my jaw. I didn't move for what felt like a full minute. I couldn't. My legs had simply stopped receiving instructions from my brain. The rain kept falling. The thunder rolled. And in the darkness beyond the fence, I heard the grass moving again. This time the sound moved. It was traveling, parallel to the fence line, moving from right to left unhurried. It's walking, I thought. It's walking along the fence. I finally got my legs working and I ran inside. What my brother didn't find. I burst through the back door and slammed it behind me, throwing the deadbolt. Marcus was in the utility room, still working on the circuit panel. He heard me come in and called out, "Any luck out there?" "Marcus." My voice came out strange and flat. "There's someone in the field." He appeared in the hallway, flashlight in hand. He studied my face for a second. "What do you mean?" I told him exactly what I'd seen. The shape at the tree line, the wrong proportions, the way it had moved along the fence, He listened without interrupting, which was unusual for Marcus. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Show me where." "It's still out there." "I know, show me." We went out together. Marcus had his flashlight and I had mine, and we went to the back fence and shone them into the field. The grass was still bent by the wind, the tree lines still dark and tangled beyond. Nothing visible. "Where exactly?" Marcus asked. "Right at that big pine, the one with the split trunk." He shone his flashlight at the split trunk pine. Empty. "You sure it wasn't a deer?" he asked. "It was standing upright." He was quiet again. Then, without another word, he unlatched the back gate and pushed through into the field. I grabbed his arm. "What are you doing?" "If someone's back there, they shouldn't be," he said simply. He made his way through the field toward the tree line. I watched the yellow disk of his flashlight moving through the rain, growing smaller. He reached the split trunk pine, moved along the tree line left and right, came back to the pine. Then he did something that surprised me. He stopped moving. Completely. His flashlight stopped too. I waited. The rain fell. Marcus stood motionless at the tree line. "Marcus?" I called. Nothing. "Marcus!" The flashlight beam swung around and he started walking back toward the fence. He moved quickly, not quite running, but close to it. He came through the gate and latched it behind him, and I saw his face was pale. "Inside," he said. "What did you—" Inside. What he found. He didn't tell me until we were both in the kitchen with the door locked and Daisy staring at us from the couch. He stood at the kitchen counter, rain dripping from his hair onto the linoleum, and he spoke quietly so Daisy wouldn't be scared. "There were footprints," he said, "in the mud at the base of that pine tree. Human footprints, and the bark on the side facing our yard. It was scraped, like someone had been leaning against it." "Leaning against it and watching the house," I said. Marcus didn't answer, which was its own kind of answer. We called our parents. They came home early from the dinner party, and our dad did what dads do. He grabbed a flashlight, walked the perimeter, didn't find anyone, declared it probably just some local kid taking shelter from the storm. Our mom locked every door and window. We all slept in the master bedroom that night, the four of us on the floor in sleeping bags like we were camping, while our dad sat up in the armchair by the window. The storm ended around 3 a.m. In the morning, the footprints Marcus had found were gone, washed away by the rain. But there was something else. Our garden shed, which sat against the fence on the left side of the yard, had its latch broken. When my father opened it, we found that someone had been inside. A lawn chair had been moved. The small window facing the house, the window with the direct sight line to our back door, had been cleared of the boxes that usually sat in front of it. They had been watching us, not just through the storm, not just in those terrifying minutes when the power was out. They had been watching us all day. The kitchen window. A different kind of storm lover. I want to tell you something about myself before I get to the worst part of this story. I used to love storms. I mean that genuinely in the way that some people love horror movies. Not because they want to be scared, but because being scared safely is one of the most paradoxically pleasurable experiences a person can have. Growing up in western Tennessee, storms were a regular feature of life from March through October, the kind that stack up over the Mississippi River and come rolling east like something with a grudge. I would watch them from our porch, sipping sweet tea, genuinely thrilled by the theater of it. I was 24 and living alone in a rental house in Memphis when my relationship with storms permanently changed. The house was a small craftsman on a quiet residential street. 2 bedrooms, wood floors, a covered back porch, and a kitchen with 2 large side-by-side windows. that looked out onto the side yard and beyond the chain-link fence, the neighbor's overgrown lot. The neighborhood was fine during the day. At night, the streetlights left large, dark gaps between them, and the neighbor's lot was exactly the kind of dense, shadowed tangle that you'd choose if you didn't want to be seen. I had been living there for about 8 months when this happened. It was a Tuesday night in late April, which in Memphis means the storms come fast and mean. The Weather Service had issued a watch for our county, but had pushed the expected arrival time back several hours. So I figured I had time to finish the episode of the show I was watching before it got serious. I was in the living room with my headphones in, genuinely absorbed, when I noticed the flashes. No thunder. I pulled my headphones off and looked toward the kitchen windows. The flashes were coming from outside, bluish-white, fairly bright but irregular. Not the steady rhythm of a distant electrical storm, more like someone experimenting with a light switch. And there was no thunder. I sat with that fact for a moment. Lightning with no thunder. That only happens when the storm is far enough away that the sound doesn't reach you. But the flashes seemed close. They were illuminating the kitchen clearly enough that I could see the outline of the table, the chairs, the refrigerator. I decided to look. I'm a practical person. I don't scare easily, or at least I didn't then. I turned off the kitchen light so my eyes would be adjusted to the dark and walked in from the living room, padding across the wood floor in my socks. The windows were large, each panel probably 2 feet wide and 4 feet tall, set side by side, giving a wide-angle view of the side yard all the way to the fence and the lot beyond. I stood back from them, keeping myself in shadow, and looked out. The side yard was dark and still. The chain-link fence ran along the edge of the property about 15 feet from the house. Beyond it, the neighbor's lot, dense with overgrown honeysuckle and old sumac trees, impenetrable in the darkness. Another flash. I watched it carefully. It came from somewhere to my left, not from the sky. From ground level. My stomach dropped. Ground level light in the neighbor's lot, intermittent, occurring at irregular intervals. A phone screen, I thought. Someone's looking at their phone screen. I stepped closer to the window, pressed my face gently toward the glass, trying to see into the dark of the lot. And then the flash came again, and this time it wasn't from the lot. It was from 2 feet in front of my face. 2 feet of glass. The flash lit the window from outside, from right outside the window, and in that half-second of light I saw a face. It was a man's face. Wide-set eyes, pale skin, close-cropped hair, and an expression that I cannot describe adequately except to say it was focused. Not surprised. Not frightened. Focused. Like he had been standing there long enough to settle in. Like this was not a random encounter. He was standing in my side yard, 2 feet from my kitchen window looking in. I stumbled backward and hit the kitchen table. My hand went over my mouth before I could scream. I stood there, shaking for what felt like several minutes but was probably about 30 seconds. Then rational thought kicked in, the way it does when you have no other option. Call 911. Don't turn on the lights. Get your phone and call 911. My phone was on the couch in the living room. I went there on hands and knees, staying below the level of the windows, and grabbed it. Called 911 and whispered my address and what I'd seen. The dispatcher told me to stay away from the windows and doors, stay on the line, and that a unit was 2 minutes out. Those 2 minutes lasted years. I heard nothing from outside. No footsteps, no voices, no retreating through the bushes. Whoever he was either still there, or he was very good at moving silently. When the patrol car arrived, I could see the red and blue reflecting off the kitchen ceiling. I unlocked the front door for the officers. They walked the property, the side yard, the back, the perimeter, and found nothing. No one hiding in the lot. No one behind the shed. Nothing. What they did find were shoe prints in the soft earth under my kitchen windows. Fresh ones, pressed deep, indicating someone who had stood there long enough to compact the soil. The prints didn't lead away from the house in a panicked sprint. They walked, deliberately, calmly, back toward the fence, then apparently over it into the neighbor's lot. He'd come back over the fence. He'd stood at my window. And when he was done, he'd left the same way he'd come. The officer who filed the report told me they'd had 3 similar calls in the neighborhood over the previous month. Someone casing houses. No one caught yet. I moved out 2 weeks later. I have not had large kitchen windows since. What the light shows. I've thought about that night a lot. Tried to reconstruct the sequence of events. The most disturbing thing, more disturbing than the face itself, is the timeline. If the flashes from the neighbor's lot were his phone screen, and if those flashes were happening before I got up to look, then he had been standing there before I came into the kitchen. Standing at the window or near it, watching me watch television through the living room doorway. Measuring, calculating, deciding. By the time I came to the kitchen, he'd moved from the lot to the yard. 2 feet of glass. That's what was between us. 2 feet of glass and the fact that he apparently hadn't decided yet what came next. Or maybe he had decided, and something spooked him when the police arrived. I try not to think about what that something might have been. The ranch at the end of the road, out by Odessa. In the summer of 2011, I was 17 years old, and my family was in the process of moving from one house to another across town. The new place needed work. Floors refinished, kitchen gutted and redone. The whole deal. So while my parents coordinated contractors and tried to live in a construction zone, they arranged for me to spend a long weekend with my great-uncle Harold out on his property near Odessa, Texas. Harold was my grandfather's younger brother. He was in his early 70s, a former ranch hand who had eventually saved enough to buy a small spread of about 60 acres outside of town. Some scrubby pasture, a hay barn, a few corrals, and a low ranch house that had been built in the 50s and not significantly updated since. He raised a small herd of cattle and a few horses, and lived completely alone, except for a cattle dog named Cutter. I want to be honest about Harold. He was not warm. He was not the kind of uncle who ruffled your hair and asked about school. He was polite in a minimalist way. He showed me where I'd be sleeping, where the bathroom was, how the shower worked, and then he left me largely to my own devices, which was fine. I had my books, my music player, and my phone. I didn't need to be entertained. My first night there was uneventful. Harold made dinner. We ate in near silence. I read for a while in the guest room and fell asleep to the sound of the West Texas wind. My second night was different. The sound that shouldn't be there. It started as a thunderstorm, and not just any thunderstorm. This was the genuine West Texas variety, the kind that comes rolling in off the Permian Basin with the confidence of something that owns the sky. By 10 o'clock that night, the lightning was striking so frequently that I could count the interval between flashes. 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, boom. 1 Mississippi, boom. The storm was practically overhead. I'd been watching a movie on my laptop and enjoying the show, the way I always did with storms. There's something about being indoors while something enormous rages outside. It makes the inside feel more inside, if that makes sense. The boundaries of shelter become more meaningful. The movie ended around 11 and I closed the laptop and lay in the dark, listening to the storm. And that's when I heard it. A clang. Not thunder. not the wind. A sharp, metallic impact, brief, definitive, occurring at almost precisely the same moment as a lightning strike. As if the lightning had struck something metal nearby and the sound was the result. Except that's not how lightning sounds. Lightning against metal is explosive, world-ending. This was smaller, deliberate. I waited. 30 seconds, a minute, clang. Same sound, same relative timing with the lightning. Something metal being struck during the brief cover of the thunder. The window decision. I lay in bed for a while, telling myself it was ranch equipment. A loose gate, a trough being rattled by the wind. Harold had a lot of metal equipment out there. Any number of things could make that sound. But the sound didn't change. It didn't vary the way loose equipment varies. It was too consistent, too rhythmic. And the timing with the lightning strikes was too precise. Whoever or whatever was making that sound seemed to be waiting for the lightning before striking. Waiting for the lightning. Think about that for a moment. I got out of bed. The guest room window faced the west side of the property. Harold had a root cellar out there, an old one built into a low rise in the ground, with heavy wooden doors secured by a padlock. Beyond that, the dark Texas pasture stretched toward a distant line of mesquite trees. I couldn't see much through the rain-blurred glass. I pressed my face close, trying to resolve the dark shapes outside into something recognizable. The corrals, the hay barn, the low mound of the root cellar. Lightning struck. In the white flash, I saw the root cellar clearly. I saw the wooden doors, angled against the hillside. I saw the padlock, and I saw a figure crouched next to the doors, one arm raised, something long and dark in its hand. The sky went dark. Thunder shook the window in its frame. They're trying to break the padlock, I realized. They've been using the thunder as cover for the sound. Everything crystallized. This was not a scared drifter trying to get out of the storm. This was deliberate, methodical. Someone who had scouted the property, identified the root cellar, and come back with a tool during a thunderstorm, specifically to mask what they were doing. The longest night, I made a decision I still think about. A decision that seemed rational at the time, but, in retrospect, was almost catastrophically stupid. I opened the window, not to confront anyone, to listen, to get a better read on where the figure was positioned and whether they had seen me yet. I told myself this would take 3 seconds, and then I'd go wake Harold. I unlatched the window and slid it upward. The West Texas night came in immediately, hot and wet and smelling of petrichor and cedar, and with it, the full sound of the storm. The rain was loud. The wind was loud. And over all of it, closer now, I heard the clang again. I leaned out and looked left toward the root cellar. Lightning obliged me. The figure was still there, crouched by the cellar doors. In the lightning's flash, I saw more detail than I wanted. Heavy work boots, dark canvas jacket, gloved hands gripping what appeared to be a heavy wrench or bolt cutter. The padlock hadn't given way yet. I could see it still hanging in the hasp, but the hasp itself was beginning to peel away from the wood. Another strike or two and the doors would be open. I pulled back inside and eased the window shut. Here's the part that scared me most. As I latched the window, another lightning strike came. And in the half-second of white light, I saw the figure straighten up from their crouch and turn toward my window. Whether they had heard me, or the light had caught my movement, I don't know. But they were looking directly at my window. I dropped to the floor. I lay there on the braided rug, not breathing, while the storm raged. Outside, I heard the rain. I heard the thunder. I heard nothing else. 3 lightning flashes with no accompanying clang. Then, 5. Then I made myself get up and go directly to Harold's room. Harold's room was at the end of the hall. I knocked once, quietly. Then again, louder. Then I opened the door. He was already sitting up in bed. "Someone's at the root cellar," I said. "They were trying to break the padlock." Harold looked at me for exactly 2 seconds. Then he threw back the covers, stood up, and crossed the room to his closet in his pajamas. He came out with a lever-action rifle, a Winchester that looked as old as the ranch house. He checked the magazine, worked the lever, and headed for the back door. "Stay inside," he said. "Lock the back door after me. Harold, lock it." He went out into the storm. I locked the door. I stood in the kitchen with my ear against it, listening, while lightning made the window above the sink flash white over and over. I heard nothing from outside for a long time. No voices, no shots, no confrontation. Then I heard Harold yelling. Not words, just the sound of his voice, authoritative and angry, carrying over the rain. It was coming from the direction of the root cellar, and it went on for about 30 seconds. Then silence. About 5 minutes later, I heard his boots on the back steps, and he knocked twice. I unlocked the door. Harold came in dripping, his white hair plastered to his forehead. He set the rifle against the wall, took off his boots, and went to the sink and washed his hands. "Well," I said. "Gone," he said. "Whoever it was took off toward the road when they heard me coming. Couldn't catch them. Did you see their face? No?" He dried his hands on the kitchen towel. "But they were working on that padlock good and proper. Another few minutes, they'd have been inside." I asked him what was in the root cellar that someone would want. Harold was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Canned goods, some tools, my grandfather's old collection of antique farm equipment. Some of it's worth money to the right people." He looked at me then, and for the first time since I'd arrived, he really looked at me. Not through me or past me, but at me. "You did right," he said, "coming to get me when you did." He made us both coffee. We sat at the kitchen table in the dark, drinking it and listening to the storm. The morning after. When the sun came up, we walked the property together. The root cellar padlock had been struck at least a dozen times. The hasp was nearly separated from the door, bent away from the wood, a few screws pulled clear. 2 or 3 more hits would have done it. On the ground beside the doors, Harold found a pair of bolt cutters, heavy-duty ones, the kind for cutting chain link or padlocks. Whoever they were, they'd left them behind in their hurry. We found footprints, too, in the mud. 2 sets, one by the root cellar, one set of larger prints that Harold identified as his own from the night before. The first set led from the direction of the main road, across the pasture to the cellar doors and back. Harold stood studying those prints for a long time. Cutter, his cattle dog, sniffed them intensely and then sat down and looked up at Harold as if waiting for instructions. "This wasn't random," Harold said finally. "What do you mean?" "I mean, they knew where the root cellar was. They came straight across the pasture to it. Didn't wander. Didn't explore. He looked up at the road, a quarter mile away. Someone told them, or they'd been here before, during the day, looking around." The thought sat between us like something heavy and cold. I left that afternoon, as planned. Harold promised to get a better lock and look into a security camera. When I got home, I told my parents what had happened. My mom wanted to call the county sheriff. My dad said Harold should handle it himself, which was the kind of thing my dad would say. Harold did end up filing a report. The county found nothing. No suspects, no leads, no match on the bolt cutters. As far as I know, whoever it was never came back. Harold replaced the root cellar doors entirely. put in a steel hasp and a hardened padlock, and installed a motion sensor light on a timer. He called me once, about 6 months later, to tell me this. It was the longest conversation we'd ever had, 5 whole minutes. At the end, before he hung up, he said, "You got good instincts, kid. Don't ignore them." I never have. What the storm covers. The pattern, 3 stories, 3 storms, 3 incidents of someone using the cover of thunder and rain to do something they didn't want anyone to hear. Here's what I want you to take away from what you've read. It's not the storms that are dangerous. Storms are just weather, physics, pressure differentials, water vapor doing what water vapor does. The storms in these stories were coincidental in the way that setting is always coincidental. They could have happened on a clear night, but they didn't. Because whoever was out there in the rain, creeping through the field or standing in the side yard or crouching at the root cellar, they chose those nights deliberately. They chose them because a storm is one of the best covers a person can have. The sound masks footsteps. The rain erases prints. The lightning keeps the people inside too occupied with watching the sky to watch the shadows. They chose stormy nights because most people don't want to be outside in a storm. And if you don't want to be outside, you don't look outside. You pull the curtains, you get under a blanket, you turn on the television, you tell yourself you're safe. And you might be. Probably, statistically, you are. But the people in these stories weren't. And they could tell you better than anyone. The feeling of safety and the fact of safety are not the same thing. What we tell ourselves. There's a cognitive phenomenon called normalization bias. It's the brain's tendency to interpret ambiguous information in the most comfortable way possible. That sound was a branch. That shape was a deer. That flash was just lightning. The brain wants to normalize. It's protective instinct of a different kind. The kind that keeps you from living in a constant state of terror, which is not compatible with functioning as a human being. We need to be able to go to sleep. We need to be able to walk outside. If our nervous system treated every ambiguous shadow as a credible threat, we'd be paralyzed. But every now and then, the shadow is exactly what it looks like. The kid in the Pine Barrens listened to the sound from the tree line. The young woman in Memphis noticed the inconsistency of the flashes. The teenager at the ranch counted the timing of the metallic clangs. They listened to the part of themselves that said, "This isn't normal." That's the other thing these 3 stories have in common. Not just the storms, not just the intruders, but the moment in each story where the person involved had to make a choice. Normalize it or take it seriously. They took it seriously. That decision in each case may have been the most important decision they made. The storms will come again, New Jersey, Memphis, Tennessee, West Texas. Different places, different people, different storms, same truth. The storms will come again. They always do. And when they do, there will be people who use them. People who have learned, consciously or through instinct, that a good storm is the best cover available. That the sound of rain on a roof drowns out footsteps on a porch. That a flash of lightning keeps eyes pointed at the sky instead of at the yard. I'm not telling you this to make you afraid of storms. I'm not telling you this to make you barricade your doors every time the weather service issues a watch. I'm telling you this so that the next time the thunder shakes your windows and the rain comes down in sheets and you're sitting there wrapped in your blanket, feeling that particular warmth of being inside while the world outside is in chaos. I'm telling you this so that if something seems wrong, you'll listen to it. That shape at the tree line, that inconsistency in the light, that sound that's slightly off, that rhythm that doesn't match the storm. If it seems wrong, it might be wrong. Look, listen, trust yourself, and maybe, just maybe, sleep with your windows locked tonight. These accounts were collected and adapted from real incidents reported across the United States. Names, identifying details, and locations have been changed to protect the privacy of those involved. The events described are believed to be accurate representations of the original experiences as reported.